that we go to often, but one I think that, if opened to us, can be of great benefit for us as Christians. And we're going to the Song of Solomon, or the Song of Songs, as the Jews would have said, a song above all songs, the Song of Solomon. We're going to be reading in just a minute verses 2 through 16, but this is a Hebrew allegorical poem. It's a little bit different text than we're used to reading, and I want to introduce you to the story because there's an allegory here. So there's a picture on the surface, and then there is a meaning there for us specifically as Christians, as the bride of Christ. So let me introduce you as we begin to the characters, all right? The characters of this narrative, the characters of this poem. On the surface level, as we said, this is a Jewish parable of sorts. I think we're familiar with parables in the New Testament. Of course, Jesus spoke in parables often, and as he did, he would be telling a spiritual meaning, a deeper spiritual meaning to the story he was relating. But that story was understandable, and in it there was a meaning he desired them to grasp, to gain. In this Jewish parable, or this allegorical poem, we find two lovers, two individuals who really show in this marriage relationship, they show a beautiful picture of what God intends in human marriage. This is really a couple that is delighting in emotional and physical intimacy. The beauty of marriage really put on display in this poem, the delights of the emotional and physical intimacies of marriage. But the two characters that we find, the two primary characters of this passage, are the bride and the groom. The bride and the groom. This groom is, on the surface level, as just being penned, as we just read it, would appear to be Solomon, or perhaps it was a shepherd boy on the hillside who was coming down to meet his beloved. There's some lack of clarity on exactly to whom he's speaking here and on the surface level, but we certainly understand there is this worthy groom in this story. So there's the groom, and then there's the bride. The bride is the beloved. The bride is this Shulamite woman, this woman to whom the groom is endeared, and the bride looks to her groom and marvels at all of his characteristics, all of his beauty, all of his fairness. And she is referred to by the groom and in chapter 5, by the daughters of Jerusalem, her friends. She's referred to as the fairest among women, this bride. But at the heart, this is an allegory, as we've already said. On the surface, it does exalt the human institution of marriage, the God-ordained institution of marriage, which God ordained, God set into motion. So I think it would do us well to follow what God has patterned, what God has given. He also has the right to govern, and we would do well to follow his pattern here and to see it in its beauty as it is, and to see it for what it is. Marriage, a beautiful picture of the relationship God desires to have with us, and that's really brought out here in the Song of Songs, in this psalm. God has a plan for marriage, and he shows the beauty of it here. But it is also an allegory, a parable that is to help us understand a deeper spiritual meaning, and by connecting our thoughts with something we do understand. And not everybody in here is married, but I think we all understand that as far as human relationships go, the marriage relationship is highest. It is dearest. It has a tremendous union, a deep emotional and physical union, a deep commitment of human love, especially as God has designed it, when it is held in the esteem and the commitment and the covenant that God would design marriage to be. It is a beautiful thing, and we connect our minds with that understanding. So God uses this allegory or this parable of a human relationship that we understand to help us better understand the relationship he desires to have with us. You understand that? You following me? He takes this human relationship and he connects it with the relationship he desires to have with us. And very much so, even though this is Old Testament, on one level, yes, this is God with the nation of Israel, but the deeper meaning here, which is clear and is understandable, is really a foreshadowing of Jesus and his bride, the bride of Christ. Jesus married to his bride. Now, for some of you, you may think, well, that's a little bit odd analogy, married to Jesus, but that is very much so the analogy that God wants us to understand. It's spoken of here in the Old Testament, in the Song of Songs. We're going to see that in a few minutes. And it's built upon in a big way in the New Testament. In the New Testament, we often find this bride of Christ, right? Jesus married to his bride, the bride of Christ. Now, what is the bride of Christ? It is all those purchased sinners, those who've placed their faith and trust in the sinless Son of God and his death sufficient for them in salvation, who have been made one with him, who've been brought to spiritual life. It is to all those who are believers, who have placed their faith and trust in Jesus alone. That would include those of us in this room who have trusted, who have jumped into the arms of Jesus, trusting only in him for salvation. That is his bride, and we are his bride. So in this story, God wants us to understand that he desires, that Jesus desires a relationship that is like unto our understanding of the closeness and the deep emotion and intimacy of that of marriage, this human relationship. So that story is brought out. We're going to read in just a minute, chapter 5. I'm just kind of bringing you into this because it's a little different than we're used to reading. So understand as we read here in just a minute, this is Eastern poetry. This is flowery. This is flowing. This is grand and kind of idyllic. It's not how we normally speak. And I don't know, maybe we got a Romeo in here somewhere who writes in beautiful prose and poetry. I've seen some of Kyle's poetry over here. He's pretty good. Maybe he would be more like Solomon here writing these prose. Is he, Christy? He's pretty flowing, pretty flowery. I get a thumbs up, right? So we got a couple Romeos in here. Don't ask Charity. That's not me. I've never written her a lick of poetry. I mean, it's just not a poet, right? Know your skills. Pastor John read some poetry last week that he wrote. Not me. But that was this. This is poetry. This is beauty. It's not poetry like we're used to hearing, but it is poetic. All right. So don't get caught up in the floweriness of the speech. But the subject is worthy of the grandest of speeches. Yes, it's flowery and flowing, but it is at its heart describing Jesus, who human words cannot fully comprehend nor can fully display the grandeur of Jesus. And it is written that we might better see him, that we might better see Jesus. If we're not careful, and I think we can see this in our own hearts, that we begin to see Jesus as a theology, as writings, as our faith, and that's good and important. Theology and doctrine are wonderful things. But even unbelievers, even those who do not know Jesus, can recite doctrine. They could name you a catechism. They could talk about God. But the writing of this and the understanding of this analogy made here and as well as in the New Testament, it's not that we would better understand him factually, but that we would better understand him for what he is and his beauty and his dearness and his sweetness and him as the most desirable love of the Christian life, of our life. She comes to a culmination in her words about him in verse 16, which we'll read in a minute, and she uses the phrase, he is altogether lovely. Let's read. Verse 2, we maybe in your Bible you see it's a paragraph marker. There's a new paragraph that begins in verse 2 of this drama. There's a change in scenes. The movie shifted a little bit here, and we find the maiden. We find this bride, and we find her really speaking to, she's recounting something that has already happened to the daughters of Jerusalem, but she, and as she describes it, is found talking about herself. Verse 2 says, I sleep, but my heart waketh. It is the voice of my beloved that knocketh, saying, open to me, my sister, my love, my dove, my undefiled, for my head is filled with dew, and my locks with the drops of the night. She answers, I have put off my coat. How shall I put it on? I have washed my feet. How shall I make them dirty? How shall I defile them again? My beloved put his hand on the hole of the door, and my bowels, my innermost beings, were moved for him. I rose up to open to my beloved, and my hands dripped with myrrh, and my fingers with sweet-smelling myrrh upon the handles of the lock. I opened my beloved, and my beloved had withdrawn himself and was gone. My soul failed when he spake. I sought him, but I could not find him. I called him, but he gave me no answer. She goes to find him. Verse 7, the watchmen that went about the city found me. They smote me, they wounded me. The keepers of the walls took away my veil from me. She speaks to these maidens, I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, if you find my beloved, that ye tell him that I am sick of love. What is thy beloved more than another beloved, O thou fairest among women? What is thy beloved more than another beloved, that thou dost so charge us? She answers, my beloved is white and ruddy. He is the chiefest among 10,000. His head is as the most fine gold. His locks are bushy and black as a raven. His eyes are the eyes of the doves by the rivers of water, washed with milk and fitly set. His cheeks are as a bed of spices, as sweet flowers. His lips like lilies, dropping with sweet-smelling myrrh. His hands are as gold rings set with beryl. His belly is as bright ivory overlaid with sapphires. His legs are as pillars of marble set up on sockets of fine gold. His countenance is as Lebanon, excellent as the cedars. His mouth is most sweet. Yea, he is altogether lovely. This is my beloved, and this is my friend, O daughters of Jerusalem. I want to draw your attention this morning to verse 16 and this phrase, he is altogether lovely. He is altogether lovely. Jesus, altogether lovely. In verse 9, there's a question asked of this woman, of this bride. She's asked by her friends. They ask the question, what is he? Why is he the most beloved above other beloveds? Why is he so special? What makes him so special? And the bride answers, oh, he is chief among 10,000. And she goes on to describe him, as we just read in verses 11 through 15, relaying his beautiful countenance, his features. She begins to talk about him, and then she brings it all to this climactic concluding statement. She said, I'll summarize it all the best I know how, the best I can. He is altogether lovely. He is altogether beautiful. He is altogether to be desired in his beauty. Not in an abstract way. No. He is everything to me. He is alone sufficient. He alone is fit for my need. He is altogether lovely, beautiful, desirable. And in these words is set before us the supreme loveliness and beauty of Christ. His loveliness, his beauty, conveys the idea of beauty to be desired. She earnestly desired, she coveted, she longed after him who was pleasant, who was delectable, who was delightful, who was admirable. All that is contained in this idea. He is altogether lovely. It speaks to Christ's beauty and his sufficiency. Desirable above all else. Beautiful above all else. And the Hebrew word here for lovely or desirable, in that Hebrew word, it's actually plural. She was saying, in essence here, that all the beauties of all the world are found in him. They are cataloged in him. They are, in his essence, collected in him. Everything that is true beauty, everything that is of proper desire. Oh, there's a lot of beautiful things in the world. There are a lot of desirable things in the world, but everything that is true beauty, that satisfies, that brings wholeness for eternity and for today, everything that is beautiful and properly desired is found in Jesus. All the rivers of proper beauty, of true beauty, are collected in the ocean, which is Jesus. They are found in him. He is beautiful. He is altogether lovely, sufficient. If you gaze upon him from any angle, and she begins to show him in his features, but if you gazed upon him from any angle, all you would find is excellence, sufficiency, and beauty found in the person of Jesus. That's not hyperbole, that's truth. That's who he is in all of his essence and in all of his beauty. She speaks of her love this way, her beloved, and we see Jesus as that, or we should, and hopefully today we grow to know him and see him more. Before we get into this passage, though, I think it would be truthful for us to say that, and I'll say to you today, I'm woefully inadequate to properly describe with words the beauty of Jesus. In fact, I'm convicted in my own heart that in my own carelessness and my own lack of spiritual pursuit and desire of God, I have failed to see the beauty of Jesus as He wants me to see Him. And maybe you would say that you could say that of yourself. I don't stand here as an authority, as if I speak to you because I've fully beheld His beauty. I have not. I cannot. It's not like we come to this relationship with Jesus as if we pull the weight here, as we pull our own weight in this relationship. We don't. We won't. We never will. But isn't that what makes Jesus so much lovelier? The fact that we don't pull our weight? Isn't that the gospel? We bring nothing to God in salvation. We don't pull the weight here. We come as empty, as broken, as ugly in our sin to Jesus, but we're loved. We're brought into that relationship. We're brought into His presence. We're made part of His bride, and that is what makes Him even lovelier, that we bring nothing to the table. We are woefully unable to see Him in all of His beauty or to describe Him for His beauty. And the beauty is that He sees us, though we are woefully unlovely. This phrase has kind of special meaning to me, this phrase, He is altogether lovely, because I grew up hearing this phrase often from my pastor, Pastor Ray Koffenberger. As a young man, I grew up underneath his preaching. My family joined that church. They still attend that church today. And he retired. He was an older man, and another great pastor came in. I had the privilege of having two great pastors growing up, but this was a man that influenced my life greatly. And he would often say, I often heard him say, I don't think I ever heard him preach a message that I remember in my mind, but I remember him very distinctly saying, Jesus is altogether lovely. He would often say that when he prayed. He would say that in times when he would draw us into worship. He would say that, and it was impactful to me. It meant something to me. So this morning, I think we would agree. We agree that we are inadequate to describe Him. If I gave you a paintbrush and said, paint the beauty of Jesus, you couldn't do it. If I told you to describe it, you would fail, and so would I. So let's go to the best thing we have on earth, which is God's Word He left for us to see His beauty, and this is the place in which we find the beauty of Christ. But even this is inadequate to fully tell of His beauty. I think we know Solomon, right? And we remember the story of Solomon. The Queen of Sheba comes to see him. She's dumbstruck by what she sees in the kingdom, and she says, the half has not been told of the grandeur of Solomon's court, right? The half has not been told of Solomon and his grandeur. And even in Scripture, the half has not been told of the beauty of Jesus. Not the 10th, not the 1% has been told of His beauty. But if we would just scratch the surface of what is told and fix our eyes on it, it would forever change us, it would mesmerize us. It would help us to see all other loves as lesser and inadequate if we were to gaze on the beauty of Jesus. The half has not been told. So let's go to the text, all right? Let's go to the text here in Song of Solomon, chapter 5, verse 2, and we find here the bride. We find the bride in this scene. She's sitting in her room, and evidently this room had an exterior entrance. There was an outside to it, right? Because her love is outside. She's in the room, and where do we find her in verse 2? We find her sleeping. It says, I sleep. I slept. Not such a bad thing. It's a good thing to sleep. Good thing to sleep in your room. But the idea here is she slept when she should not have been sleeping. She slept and it was careless. She slept and it was thoughtless. She slept here and she was acting selfishly. She knew that her beloved was going to come, but she was sleeping. She was sleeping when she should have been awake. She should have been waiting on her love, but she was not. We all know this story plays out too often in our lives as Christians. This carelessness, this thoughtlessness, this distracted nature. She slept, and that's a picture of her waywardness, of her backsliddenness. We find here a backslidden bride, and often if we would said what is truthfully in our own hearts, we would admit that we are often distracted and we're often sleeping. We're in some spiritual slumber, some spiritual sleepy stupor, instead of following Christ, we're seeking other things. We're distracted. Our affections have been drawn away. Rather than taking Jesus seriously, rather than seeking Him and loving Him and serving Him, we become distracted. We become careless. Maybe you'd say, that's me right now. I'm not what I ought to be as a follower of Jesus. And I don't mean that in an abstract way. I think everybody in here could say, I'm not what I ought to be as a follower of Jesus. But I mean in a real way, in your own heart. You'd say, I am not where I ought to be. I'm distracted. I've been drawn away by other loves. My heart is not fixed on Jesus. I find myself sleeping in a spiritual stupor, distracted. And I know what this bride is speaking of. I know the waywardness of my heart. She slept. Verse 2, but it says she awoke. She slept, but she woke. When she heard the call of her love. Verse 2, he says, open to me, my sister, my love, my dove, my undefiled. For my head is filled with dew, and my locks with the drops of the night. Evidently, here her love stood at the door knocking, and probably for some time he stood there knocking while she slept. Why? Because he was outside and his hair had gotten wet from the dew. It was cold and damp outside. He'd been standing there while she carelessly slept instead of waiting for him. But it gets worse. She does awake after some time of him knocking so that his hair could get wet, as he should have been inside with her, rather patiently knocking at the door for her. When she wakes, rather than running to the door and opening it to him, she yells out excuses. What does she say in verse 3? She says, I've put off my coat. How shall I put it on again? I've taken my coat off. How shall I put it on again? I've washed my feet. How shall I get them dirty again? How shall I defile them? She begins to make excuses. Rather than running to the door, she excuses herself. She makes excuses. We say to Jesus with our excuses, I'm tired, Lord. Hey, Lord, I'm lazy. Yeah, okay, I'm lazy. I'm distracted. I'm too disinterested. Lord, I have my things I'm pursuing that I want. And when I'm not pursuing those things, I just want to veg, Lord. I just want to put Netflix on. I just want to do my thing. This isn't the case for you here today, but maybe there's been a time in your life you say, Lord, well, it's Sunday, and I could go with my church family and worship and be there in their presence, but Lord, I'm tired. I'm disinterested, Lord. You wouldn't say it, you wouldn't verbalize it, but by your actions, I'm distracted, Lord. And he's distant, and you excuse yourself. Why? Because he doesn't hit the priority list. You've been there, knocking at your door. I'm convicted. It's far often too true of me. Lord, I've taken off my coat. I've got my thing. Why should I put it back on again? She goes on to say, she makes another excuse here. She says, I've already washed my feet. Why should I make them dirty again? Well, washing of feet was a ceremonial, it was a cultural custom, but it was also a spiritual thing. It was a religious custom for them as Jewish people. And she had washed her feet. Why should she get them dirty again? And for many of us, we, in our own little religious piety, we say, Lord, I've done the spiritual thing. I went to church. I read my verse. I spent a few minutes in prayer. I prayed at dinner time. I've done that religious thing. I've given you my religious duties. I've done those, Lord. Now the rest, get off my back. That's mine, Lord. These are my things. I gave you that religious time. I've given you these things. I've washed my feet. The rest is mine, Lord. She turned away from her husband, her love. She failed to answer the door. She made excuses because she was too tired, because she was disinterested, because he had not made the priority list, because she had justified that she was clean already. Why did she need to go and spend time with her love, the lover of her soul, her groom, her bride, or her husband? Why should she not go to him? She was too busy. She was wayward. She was backslidden in her heart. But the bride wakes, does she not? In verse 2, her heart wakes. I rose to open to my beloved. Verse 5, I rose to open to my beloved. Verse 6, look there with me. She says, I opened to my beloved. She goes to the door and she opens the door, finally, woken from her stupor, finally made her excuses, her desire now awoken to him to somewhat. She goes, she opens the door, and what has happened? She finds her condition. She finds that he is not there. Sin, her carelessness, her excuses, even her religious duties had drawn her away from the presence and the fellowship of her love. He had withdrawn, not his person, nothing had changed. She was still his wife. She still was his wife, nothing had changed there, but his presence wasn't there. She had withdrawn herself from him. He came to the door knocking. He was where he was supposed to be, faithful, and she had drawn herself away. Still his wife, but not in the presence, not knowing the fellowship, not knowing the nearness and the strength of the lover of her soul, of her friend, of her beloved, and we find ourselves in that position often, Christian, do we not? Careless, flippant about the Christian life, keeps us from knowing the closeness of Jesus. Think of it like this. Here's Jesus. He invites us to this great picnic. Imagine with me, you're on this hillside. There's beautiful mountains in the distance. The sky is blue. The birds are chirping. The flowers are blooming. The grass is blowing, in the gentle breeze. And he sets a picnic lunch for us. He pulls out the beautiful blanket, the gingham. Your picture in your mind's eye is the perfect epitome of a picnic lunch. And he sets it out, and he pulls out trays of cheeses and meats and trays of fruit for us. And here Jesus is inviting his love, his dear, his bride, to him, to be with him, to know of all of his presence. He lays it out. And what do? We stand him up. We blow him off. Jesus welcoming us into his presence, into his faithfulness, into his strength. He wants to meet us in his word. He wants us to feast on his truth. He wants to walk with us in our daily life. He wants to go with us to work. He wants to be with us at school. He wants to help us in our marriage relationships. He wants to help the mothers that are busy and struggling at home. He wants to help the fathers who are out at the workplace, or the men who are wanting to live for Jesus but struggling with their mouth and their temper. He wants to be there. He wants to provide his goodness. He's prepared the table. He's given all the goods. He wants us to joy in it, and we stand him up. We're distracted. We don't have time for him. We fail as this bride failed. She says so here in verse 6. I opened to my beloved, but my beloved had withdrawn himself and was gone. My soul failed when he spoke. My soul failed. I failed. I messed up. I stumbled. I forgot him. Verse 6. Then I sought him. I couldn't find him. His distance was far from me. I called him, but he gave no answer. I felt the emptiness of his presence. She goes out to look for him here in verse 7. She goes out to find him, and the watchmen find her as if they'd found some prostitute on the roadside. Out at this night, they say, she says in verse 7, the watchmen, they went out about the city and found me. They smote me, they wounded me. The keepers of the walls took away my veil from me. The watchmen, the keepers, they wounded me. God brings watchmen to wound us, to wake us from our spiritual stupor and slumber. Often God has used his word in my life. Often he's used a preacher, a message, a parent, a friend, to rebuke me, to wound me, to point out my sin, to get my attention. These watchmen that came were not spitefully sent. No, they were the instruments of his love. Don't miss this. God sends watchmen as a testimony, as an instrument of his love into our lives to wake us from our stupor, to wake us from our slumber, in love, to restore us. But they can be painful. Not all sickness is because of our waywardness, but often God does bring sickness, sometimes financial reversal, sometimes a change of plans, sometimes persecution and mistreatment from friends and family, from a boss at work, from government, from Hartford, from D.C. God will bring sometimes difficulty, watchmen, into the life of a church, into the life of believers to wake us from our spiritual stupor, from our slumbering. These are instruments of God's love because we need it. God sent a watchman for her. Verse 8 to transition in the story. Go to verse 8. She's been retelling this to these friends of hers, to these daughters of Jerusalem. She's been telling them. Now she charges them. She said, here's what's happened. Now help me. She says in verse 8, I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, if you find my beloved, then you tell him that I am sick for love. I must have him. I must be restored again. They answer her, what is thy beloved more than another beloved? Why is he so special? What makes him different than other loves, O thou fairest among women? What is thy beloved more than another beloved, that thou dost so charge us? Why is he so special? What makes him so beautiful? Why is he so desirable? There's a change here. There's a movement in the story. As she goes from retelling her condition as failed here, as backslidden, as careless, as thoughtless, this backslidden bride, to now to begin to speak as she catches a glimpse again of the beauty of her beloved. We see the backslidden nature of her bride. Now we see the beauty of the beloved, the beauty of the groom, the beauty of Jesus. She begins to recount it for us. I want you to notice a couple things about the beauty of Jesus. Number one, notice this, as we see here in verse 9, that the beauty of Christ is hidden. It is not seen. It is not seen by the spiritually blind. Those that are spiritually dead do not see the beauty of Jesus, just like the daughters of Jerusalem that said, what's so special about him? What makes Jesus so beautiful? And they don't see it. They just don't see it. They might be asking with a true desire to know, what makes him so special? What makes him more? What makes Jesus more than Confucius? What makes Jesus more than Muhammad? What makes Jesus more than some philosopher, some guru, or some political savior? What makes Jesus so special? They ask that question. What makes him so beautiful? They're blind to see it, and the spiritually blind around us are blind to see the beauty of Jesus. But notice this. They were not so blind. They are not so blind. The lost are not so blind to see the beauty of the bride. Look what they say here in verse 9. What is thy beloved more than another beloved? Why is he so beautiful? O thou fairest among women. They see the beauty of the bride. She's fairest among women. This was the phrase that her beloved had given her in chapter 2, the fairest among women. They see the beauty that's in her. Isn't that true? Yes, the world derides Christians and downplays Christians and wants to lay aside Christians because they see something different about Christians. They see something beautiful and desirable. They may not admit it, but they see something that they don't have, the beauty of Christ. It's not us, for we come in our filth and ugliness. It's only the beauty of Jesus that he shines into our hearts that we might shine as lights into darkness. It's the beauty of Jesus, we, the mirror reflecting his beauty. They're too blind to see what makes him special, but they see his beauty in us. That's kind of humbling, kind of convicting. The beauty they see of Christ is the little beauty that we put on display. Oh, to show his beauty more. Oh, to take that more seriously. Oh, to reflect the beauty of Christ to the spiritually blind. So we see here about the beauty of Christ that those that are lost do not see it. They are blind to see it. But to those who know him, to the bride, to those who've been saved, to those who've been spiritually, their eyes opened, the beauty of Christ is unveiled. It's put on full display. It's opened. It's indispensable to the Christian. I'm not saying here that we fully see it all. We'll spend an eternity discovering it. The beauty of his character, his goodness, his person, and how it reflects in everything that he does. We'll spend an eternity learning of that, but we begin to see it. We see it in salvation. We see it in his presence. We see it through his word. We see it as he walks with us through the valley of the shadow of death. We see him. We see his beauty put on display for us. It's opened to us, and it was to her. Oh, she's awoke now. Oh, she's reflecting now. She stands up on her tippy toes, right? She begins to speak now, bubbling over. Oh, he is the fairest. He is the chiefest of 10,000. Oh, he is unbelievable. He is awesome. He is wonderful to me. He is sufficient for me. He is my heart's desire. He is beautiful. The daughters at the gate, they question her. What makes him so special? And she rises to the occasion. Oh, she doubles down. She says, oh, no. He is not ordinary. He is beautiful. He is the fairest of 10,000. She begins to recite what she has seen in him, what she has beheld by spending time with him, what she's observed. And this isn't just like reciting facts. She's not, oh yeah, he's fit, he's got a low, he looks super nice, he has a low body fat index, he is this. No. He is amazing. He is wonderful. He is beautiful. He is above all. He is everything I need. She doubles down, right? Christian, how will the world ever see Jesus as special if we don't? The beauty of Christ. Have you seen it? Do you want to reflect it? Do you want to bubble over? Speaking about it. She found it. And she goes on to summarize, or to give these statements about the beauty of her beloved. And I'm not going to go through each and every one of these in great detail. Maybe someday one of us will have the opportunity to go through the Song of Solomon. It's been awoken to me as a beautiful, necessary book. But just by summary, what does she see in her beloved? What are his beauties? She begins with a general statement of his fitness. She begins in verse 10 by saying, my beloved is white and ruddy. He is the chief among 10,000. This is a general statement. And you could say white as in his divinity, or in his purity, and ruddy as in his bloodied hands and head, or his human nature, and both of those would be true. I think that's right. That is who Jesus is, and as the God-man. But this is really a general statement of his health, his fitness for her. He is perfectly fit for her, the bride. He is perfectly what she needs in every way. He fills the void. He is the chief among 10,000. He is sufficient. He is everything she needs him to be. She is everything that the bride needs. She alone satisfies him. Nothing else could satisfy her. We as Christians sometimes in our adulterous hearts begin to think another love might satisfy us, might bring satisfaction to our hearts. May we see it as only Jesus. It is only Christ. She did. He's white, he's ruddy, he's fit. It's true of us and salvation. All we need is Jesus. He's the only sufficient one to bring salvation, and he is the only sufficient one to satisfy us in the Christian life. There is no one like him, and it would do us well to rally around him. to speak much of him, to meditate much on him, to love him. He is altogether lovely. She goes on to describe his features in verse 11, and I'll quickly go through these in conclusion. She begins to speak of his features. She's looking now upon him. She's recounting what she has seen. She says his head. She begins there. His head is of the most fine gold. What is Jesus? He is fully God. He is not an ordinary man. Oh yes, human, but he is fully God. He is divine. He is extraordinary in his likeness because he is very God. He is God. He is beautiful, for he is God. Second, she says his locks, his hair, is bushy and black as a raven. What's that mean? He's not bald like me, like some of you. He's not gray like a few of the rest of you, or white, right? No, he is youthful and vigorous. Many today would say that Jesus is old-fashioned. Oh, he's not necessary today for modern man. We don't need this Jesus, some crutch. Huh. No, he is just as relevant today as he's ever been. Just as sufficient today in the 21st century as he was in the first. He is youthful and vigorous. Verse 12 says his eyes were the eyes of doves. She'd looked often into his eyes, and what had she found? She had found peace. Peace, contentment of her heart. Peace. Jesus brings peace. He brings peace with God and salvation, and he brings peace to our lives. Many of us as believers walk around at every turn anxious and fearful. And the invitation to the lover of our soul, from the lover of our soul, is to look on him. He is peace. And he desires and wants and will and can. He's sufficient to bring peace over our anxieties and our fears. Jesus alone. Verse 13, he's sweet. His cheeks are like sweet flowers. His lips like sweet myrrh. Verse 14, his hands are as gold rings. His belly is like ivory overlaid in sapphires, right? What is being conveyed here. We beautify things, right? We put rings on our hands and jewelry. Ladies, some of you, thankfully, add a little makeup every once in a while, right? You cover some blemishes. Those are good things. That's what we do. We beautify things. Jesus needs no beautification. Jesus is beauty. Why put something on him to try to make him more beautiful? He is beauty. He does not need to be made more palatable. The gospel doesn't need to be made more palatable to a 21st century person. We do not have to take the church and worship and holiness and try to make it more palatable. No. He is beauty of himself. He has no blemishes, no deficiencies. He is beautiful. He needs not to be added to in any way. Verse 15, his legs are pillars of marble and sockets of gold. He is strong. He is fit. He is able. He holds us up. He holds his bride together. He holds his church together, regardless what may come at it. He is strong. Columns of marbles. He brings sanity into the insanity of our life. Verse 16, his words, his mouth, it's most sweet. The word of God is most sweet, and yet we treat it so flippantly. It is like gold, right? Psalm 19, it is more to be desired than gold, yea, than much fine gold, sweeter also than honey and the honeycomb. And then she concludes, as we'll conclude this morning, she summarizes it all together, and she says, he is altogether lovely, sufficient, desirable, my all in all I need. Oh, to be more in love with Jesus. Oh, to gaze more clearly on his beauty. Jesus is beautiful. He is altogether lovely. And this morning, he's proposing himself. To the sinner, to the searcher, he's wooing and drawing in love. Bloody hands. For us. Knocking at the door, Christian. Knocking. Your love, your beloved. Watchman's wounded in love. Here he is, knocking for each of us. Wherever you are today, look on Jesus. See him again as altogether lovely. For he is. He is. Let's pray.